Good afternoon. We would like to welcome you to Strengthening School Partnerships with Native Families and Communities. This webinar is provided by two RELs that Jackie was just telling you about. The first one is the REL Southwest, which has 8 alliances, 2 of which are really focused on Native American families, communities, and students. And they are the ones that really express the need for research-based information on strengthening school partnerships with Native families and communities. The second REL that's presenting with us is the REL Pacific. And as you notice, the Guam Alliance is very focused on this topic. This particular bridge event is to provide participants with research-based resources to help educators strengthen Native family and community engagement in student learning. And as a result of joining us today, you will gain some familiarity with 2 high-quality resources for engaging Native families and engage in a discussion and obtain some resources to incorporate these resources in your work with Native families and communities. We'll have 3 presenters, Stephanie Autumn, who is a member of the Hopi Nation, myself, and Kirsten Miller. And we'll start with Stephanie Autumn. She is a member of the Hopi tribe, a mother of 5, and mother of 16. Stephanie serves as an AIR Senior Technical Assistant Specialist and brings extensive experience in developing, implementing, and evaluating programs in Indian country. She has worked in Indian country for over 35 years on issues of American Indian adult and juvenile justice, education, strategic planning, substance abuse prevention, restorative justice, and tribal youth mentoring programs. Stephanie, thank you so very much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Heidi, and Loma, Bonjour, Petu Washte, and good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to join you today on this important topic that we're going to learn from each other on. I believe that everyone that is joining us from across Indian country and the territories, that you are the real wisdom holders, and we always learn. Probably we leave these learning sessions probably learning as much as from you as you do from us. So just want to give a little backdrop before my colleagues share some of the tools that they have within their centers with you today. So I'm framing this conversation through an Indigenous lens, a Native lens. And in 99.9% of our Native communities, we know there are 2 predominant worldviews, the linear and the relational. What we've learned about the linear worldview in the past 200 years is that it's rooted in mainstream America thought and value, and it's very temporary and firmly rooted in the logic of cause and effect. In contrast, what we know from the blood that runs through our veins, our DNA, is the relational worldview, which is rooted in Native thought and culture and sees life as harmonious relationships where health, wellness, and education are achieved by maintaining balance between the many interrelating factors in our lives, in our family, in extended family, in our community, and in our nations. The striking difference between the relational worldview and the linear worldview is that it's intuitive, it's non-time orientated, and fluid. What I've learned in working across Indian country for a few decades here, the picture you see of me is an old one, so I've got a couple of decades behind me. The contexts that Native families strive to operate in are ones that are filled with strength-producing and harmonizing resources. So when I say harmonizing resources, those are resources that complement each other, that support each other, that are based on our values. What we know is the richness of our culture, language, and values provide us the anchors which hold us to who we are. The quote that you see on my slide from the Iroquois Confederacy mirrors the relational worldview, reminding each of us of our individual and collective responsibilities of instilling the values of relationship, education, and hard work to continue in the strengthening of our Native communities and nations. Since time immemorial, Native nations and their scholars have produced evidence of complex and multifaceted oral and written histories, philosophies, and holistic educational pedagogies that provided for vibrant learning environments in Native communities. What a stark contrast that is in terms of what most of our families have been told our experience in Western dominant society educational systems. So I think a good starting point in engaging families and engaging our communities is always that constant planting that seed of who we are as a people, who we've been as a people, our generational knowledge that we bring to not only our own Indigenous learning systems, but to the Western learning systems as well. Schools that I've worked with that are the most successful in engaging families are those that are intentional in terms of setting aside time every year to develop strategic plans targeted to fostering a renewed commitment of the school leadership and the staff to work with the families and the community in the pursuit of educational excellence and equity for Native students. And I know I've worked in schools. I was part of the survival school movement in the early 80s in the state of Minnesota, and I've worked in charter schools. And we get overwhelmed with our work and our task, and finding the time to develop a strategic plan that will improve our engagement with our parents and our caregivers and our family is often very difficult. But if we want to change the landscape of what we've been experiencing for the past 20 years, we know that we have to step backwards and take notice how our people have always worked in inclusion, and everybody has a voice, and everybody has something that they can contribute to the greater good of what we want to see happening in our communities, from having successful students, having our young people being employed in the workforce, having our young people building that does ensure the future generations, and that at the wider and higher levels that there is equity of resources across this country for our families, for our communities. So this isn't an easy task, we know that. And I don't come to you today saying that it's easy. What I come to you with is knowing that we have to be strategic, and we have to be well-rounded thinkers and workers within our schools, with our families, and in the community. Because preparing the next Native generations of students to excel in education and the workplace is such a daunting task. It requires creativity. It requires innovative thinking. It requires risk-taking. It requires new partnerships within our own tribal communities and outside of our tribal communities. It requires very intentional and restorative relationship building. And we have to get out of the paradigms that we've existed in. And most people say think outside the box, but because I think in circles, we even have to get outside of our own tribal comfort zones and think outside those circles in order to ensure student success. What I've witnessed across Indian country is that when parents are provided processes where their voices and needs are heard and acted upon, we move closer to our educational goals in our schools and in our communities of ensuring access for Native students to a rich curriculum that prepares them for the rigors of college and enabling them to fully participate in the workforce. What I've seen has been vacant because of the lack of resources and because oftentimes we work in our own silos in Indian country, is that we have to break free of those silos and address the multidimensional contextual problems associated with decreased achievement in the school. Way before our young people begin school, we need to be at the table with parents, tribal leadership, and community stakeholders. And if we can continually engage in those conversations, there will be, we will see a more fruitful student population that arrives at school ready and prepared to learn. When I think about preparing the next generation, and in diverse communities, we have a multitude of populations within our schools sometimes in terms of the teaching staff and administration. And what I always try to remind administrative leaders and teachers of is that the vision that we hold for our young people, our children, are very similar to the same of most American families. We want our children to live productive, healthy lives, free of want and full of choices. And we know that depends on a robust education system. And in order to attain that robust education system, there has to be new bridges built, stronger reinforcements around the bridges that we have built in order for communities and schools to work together to ensure that these opportunities are equitably distributed to all Native students. The dynamics associated with the performance and success of Native students is far-reaching in scope. It's our very future. And it requires not only the attention of new resources, but a diligent watchfulness on funding streams, on our data that we're collecting, on our evaluation mechanisms. It also requires us to connect not only our heart to our mind, but then having compassion and having the tenacity to support those that we are there to serve. And that's our families, the parents, and our students. And we have to have a willingness to identify new community-driven, led specific solutions to close the achievement gaps that we're seeing across Native communities. What we know is that we are the invisible population among all minority populations. And we know that in order to increase our visibility, in order to strengthen our voice, in order to be seen in all the systems that sometimes block us from having and achieving that vision that other students have in the educational system, is that we have to step back and we have to look at the wisdom behind us and embrace it wholeheartedly in committing everything that we can to our communities and making sure that the voices of those that we are serving are resonating with leadership, with administration, with those that we garner our funding for. Many generations ago, there was a quote that I hold near to me, and I'll close with today. And it's from Chief Sitting Bull. And it says, let's put our minds together and see what life we can make for our children. I know that each and every one of you are working towards that in your profession. And I salute you, and I honor you, and I thank you for the time that you've given me today.
Thank you so very much, Stephanie, for building the context for this session. It is so greatly appreciated. Jackie, can we switch over to the next set of slides now?